Hi guys, Fred here from InDesign Tips and Tricks. Today I want to talk about images that live inside of their boxes in InDesign. It's quite a tricky concept for some people, and understandably. The first time that you bring an image onto the pasteboard or your document in InDesign and you want to move it around, you're not sure whether you've selected the box or the image. And sometimes, why is the image moving but the box isn't? Sometimes the box moves but the image doesn't. Sometimes the box and the image all move together. And actually, these are the fundamentals of how we create really complex, cool design layouts. We're going to whiz back in time here to a 20-year-old Fred. Sorry Fred, wait there a sec mate. He's going to go on to talk about his life story. So if you just want to find out about how to move images within their boxes, fast forward to 7 minutes 20 and we'll sort you out. Got my first job in the design studio, super exciting time. And we used an app called Quark Express to do all of our desktop publishing and design layout. Adobe Photoshop was still the king of image editing. And we had to flatten our layered Photoshop files to bring them into Quark Express as an image. You'd have to save them as a JPEG or a TIFF, for instance. Now, my MD at the time was a super talented illustrator. He could draw anything that you could think of. He'd scan in his designs and he'd bring them into Photoshop and create really complex layered files, coloring them in and adding effects. Unfortunately, he had this one really fatal habit. He didn't save his layered Photoshop files. So he'd finish his work, all looked good, flatten the file, save it as a JPEG, close the file, which was swiftly followed by anger and rage. There was biting of fists, punching of desks, because he just realized that he'd saved over his layered Photoshop file and there was no going back and editing those individual layers. It was done. So one day the MD turned to me and he said, Fred, Adobe have got this seminar coming up and I'd like you to go along. At the time I was really keen, so I jumped at the chance. Apparently they wanted to talk about some new apps that they had out. So I went along to the seminar and it was 400 or 500 people strong. And it was led by this charismatic chap called Guy Gowan. Guy was one of those guys that it felt like he'd written the Adobe rulebook. He knew the ins and outs and everything there was to know about the creative side of Adobe apps. His main agenda for the day was to talk about this new app called Adobe InDesign. And amongst all of the cool features that he explained on that day, there was 3 standout features for me. One of them was you could do drop shadows native in InDesign. You didn't have to go to Photoshop to create a drop shadow and bring that image back into InDesign. You could do it all there. Number 2, you could set opacity and transparency for objects and images, which meant you could do really cool overlays without going back to Photoshop and bringing the file back into InDesign. But probably the one standout feature for me was that you could bring a layered Photoshop file as an image straight into InDesign. There was no more flattening the file and saving it as a JPEG. You could keep your PSDs and bring those straight into InDesign. So I went home super excited, told my girlfriend, that went straight over her head, probably ordered a pizza, went to bed, woke up the next day nice and early, got to the studio early. That never happened. MD rocks up, he says, Fred, what did you learn yesterday? I said, well, Adobe have got this new app out. It's called InDesign. He said, okay, what can it do? So I said, well, you can do drop shadows native in InDesign. Drop shadows were still a big thing. You don't have to go to Photoshop, you can do it all in there. Okay, sounds good, he said. What else can it do? I said, well, you can set opacity of objects directly in InDesign. So you don't need to go back to Photoshop. You can do really cool overlays and stuff like that. Okay, yeah, this is sounding pretty cool. Anything else? Well, there's a feature that you might like, and that is that you can bring your layered Photoshop files directly into InDesign. I looked into his eyes and his brain was cooking. Once the microwave stopped spinning and the ping went off, he said, how much is the app? And I said, well, technically it's free because it's already on the CDs that we've got for Photoshop and Illustrator. And that was it. The studio changed overnight. And certainly within a week, the majority of the studio was using InDesign. So why am I telling you all this? Well, obviously Adobe weren't going to reinvent the wheel. They wanted to come out with something that we were kind of used to, and they'd probably been paying attention to how Quark operated for years. So the concept of an image within a box was already something that we were used to in Quark. You drew your box, you brought in your picture. Quark had a black cursor for moving the boxes, and then you had a hand tool for moving the images within the box. So naturally Adobe did the same, although their hand tool was always used for moving the whole interface around when you zoomed in. They didn't want that, so they had the black selection tool for moving your box, and then the grey direct selection tool for clicking on the image and moving the image within the box. It worked really well, we all understood it, life was cool. Then a few years in, inevitably the software got updated and the first person loaded InDesign and they dropped an image onto the page that they were working on, and they noticed that there was this target in the middle. So we're designers, we're inquisitive, we'd click on the target and that selected the image. Wow, this was cool. This was a time saver because now you didn't have to go to the toolbar, click your black arrow to drag the box, click your grey arrow to select the image, and back and back and back and back and forth. You could do it all by clicking the target. And herein created the issue for future InDesign users, I think. So you're new to InDesign, you drop an image onto your page, you see the target, you naturally click the target. It makes sense, that's how you're going to move it. But you click the target and the image moves. So you undo that and you try another method. And then you get frustrated. And I actually know people that have abandoned InDesign just from this one feature alone. So today, I would like to show you why the images live inside boxes and how we can use that to our advantage to create some really cool, complex layouts. Here we are with our fresh page in InDesign. We've got two ways to add an image. We can go File, Place, or Command D. That'll bring up a window and ask us where we want to navigate to get our images to bring in. I've just got this sunset demo at the moment. And if I click and drag, it'll bring out a box to bring in the sunset. Click off of that. The other way that we could do it is go over to the rectangle frame tool here. Click out any size box that we like. And then we can go Command D or File Place like we did before. Pick up our sunset demo, and then that drops that into the box. Notice that InDesign has just brought that image in with not really any relevance to what the box is doing or anything like that. If we go over to the black selection tool, with our box selected, we can hold Command, Option, Shift and E, and that has actually brought the image inside our box in proportion to how it is seen in Photoshop. Now this is really useful because InDesign might bring the image in really big if it's a large Photoshop file, for instance. So just hitting those three keys and the E key just gives us a visual look of what we're dealing with. So the image now isn't filling its bounding box. Clicking away from the image will deselect it. So if we hover over the image, we get the target. If we click the target, that's now selected the image. It shows us the parameters of the image. So what I can do here is hold Option and Shift, grab a corner toggle, click and drag out, and this is now expanding the image. So the image is now gone beyond the image box itself. So the box itself is kind of like looking through a window, and the image is like the scene out of the window, which you can adjust the scale of. Another way to think about it, if ever you've worked in Photoshop and you've created a layer mask, the box in InDesign is simply creating a mask. the image can then do whatever it likes within that mask because the two essentially aren't linked. Let's have a look at some shortcut keys. So with the black cursor selected, the selection tool, let's click away from our image. I can click on the box. I can hold Shift and Escape, and that has now selected the image. So it's switched from the box to the image. If I press Escape again, it's returned back to the box. This is a really speedy way of working because I can flick between the box and the image and back again really quickly. So I can select the image and move it. I'm not sure about that side, so I can move the image over to this side. Oh, that's nice. I love that bit of a sunset there. Then I can hit Escape and go back to the box. Now the image is inside the box. If I hold those magic 3 keys again, Command, Option, Shift, hold the corner like I did before with the image and do exactly the same thing, this is now going to pro up the box and the image with it. So it's like the two are forced to be locked together. They're not grouped. I can still go Shift Escape and we can still see our image. We can now move our image around within the container box. Hit Escape and we're back to the container box. So why is this so useful? Well, it does open up a world of opportunities for other things that we can do. Let's delete this shape out. I'm now going to use the rectangle frame tool. I'm going to hold Shift, click and drag and create a square. Let's go over to swatches. If you don't see swatches, you can go up to Window, come down to Color and pick swatches. Let's just put some black in for a minute so we can see what we're doing. We'll go back to our black selection tool here. By the way, you can just press the V key for that. And we're going to hold Option and Shift and drag along to somewhere about here. Now we can go up to Object, come down to Convert Shape and make this a triangle. Let's click back on the first square, hold Option and Shift, click and drag to the right. InDesign brings up these nice little green guides to show us we're evenly spaced there. Let's go up to Object, Convert Shape, Ellipse. If I click and drag over all 3 of these shapes, or I can click on a shape, hold Shift, click another shape, click another shape. That's all 3 selected now. We've got this window over here called Pathfinder. I like to keep all these tools out because I use them a lot. If you can't see Pathfinder, you can go to Window, Object and Layout, Pathfinder. And over here, this particular one combines all the shapes into one shape. So if we press that, it doesn't look like it's done a lot. However, this is now seen as one shape in InDesign. So if we do Command D to get to place our picture, and we get our sunset again, that's a pretty cool effect. Holding Command, Option, Shift and E brings that image back in proportion within our shapes. Now what's happened here, if we go to our target, InDesign has reached the height of the image and it stopped at that, so it's not filled our width. Here's some more shortcut keys for you. We can hold Command and Option and then press the full stop key. And that will actually bring our image up in set increments. If I hold Command and Option and then press the comma, it brings it down. Back up with the full stop. And I quite like the look of that. And when we're doing things like this and we've dropped colour into the shapes, we need to be a little bit careful. So if I press Escape and go back to the shape instead of the image, we've still got black selected here in our swatches. Now I've accidentally left colour in behind shapes before that have got images in, and when they've come back from being printed, Sometimes, on very rare occasions, you can see a really thin line, and that's where between InDesign and the PDF output, something has happened where it thinks that you want to include that color as part of the image. Like the two just don't match up quite as accurately as you'd like. So I just make sure I go back in and I make this color none. And in fact, I'm not sure if you can see that on YouTube there, but it has actually taken away what looked like a slight black frame. And while we're on the subject of frames, we can now add a frame to this if we wanted. So we could toggle our frame to the front in our swatches. We could put a black frame on there. We could come down to stroke. We could add some stroke. It's fairly striking. Preferred it as it was, I think. Another quite cool feature. Let's put our black back in here, and we'll pretend that we haven't done our file place to get our picture yet. Because I've already got this image in my document, I can go over and hit the target, select the image. I can do a Command-C to copy it. I can then come over, making sure that I'm in the black selection tool, and click our new shape, our combined square, triangle and circle. And if I hold Command, Option and V, that pastes anything that's on the pasteboard into the shape. Let's delete this image. Bring this up. InDesign gives us some nice guides here to show us we're in the center of the page. We can hold our Command, Option, Shift and drag the image out. And that's actually quite a cool effect. Let's delete that out and see what else we can do. Grabbing our text tool here, click and drag out a box. Let's type the word sunset. I've done Command A there to select all the text, and I'm going to hold Command, Option, Shift again. Using the full stop, we can actually make our type bigger, just like we did the image. Whoops. Back to the black arrow, drag our text box out, and we've got our full sunset word. Now I want to select quite a chunky font here, so let's see what we got. Maybe something like Gotham Black might look quite cool. Back to the black arrow. Now something quite cool that we can do here, we can actually convert this live type into an outline, or essentially a shape. If we come up to type, we can come down to create outlines, or Shift, Command and O for create outlines. And if we go to our direct selection tool here and click it, we can see that this has now turned this into a vector shape. Now that is really cool. We can come back to our selection tool here, and if we go Command D again to get our picture, we can grab our sunset picture, Command, Option, Shift and E, and that has now placed the sunset directly in the word sunset. Let's click the target, or Shift Escape, and then we can hold Command, Option and the full stop button and bring that up. Hit Escape to go back to our shape, take the black off, and that looks pretty cool. Let's bring that into the center of the page. Where are you, middle guide? Come on, middle guide, there you are. Command, Option, Shift, grab a corner, click and drag out. And there we have it. That is looking pretty sick. And that is one of the main reasons why images always live inside of boxes. And that's it. Hopefully that's given you more of an insight in how to move your images around inside the boxes, and you're well on the way to creating yourself some really cool looking design layouts. If you've got any questions, please stick them in the comments. If you feel like this video has helped you out, please give it a big thumbs up. It'd be cool to have you along for the ride, so subscribe and we'll be putting some more videos out in the future. And we'll see you on the next one. Cheers!